Merci, Cho. Our next item is review and adoption of the agenda. Mr. Rutland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The one matter on the agenda is a presentation and briefing from the Premier and officials on the COVID-19 economic and social recovery. That's the only matter on the agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Rutland. Are there any additions or changes to the agenda? Okay, hearing none. Can I have a motion to approve the agenda as presented? And if anybody can call in verbally or make a visual, I got one from Mr. Johnson.
I'll move that motion here, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Let's see, show Mr. Johnson. Motion is moved. Up next, are there any declarations of conflict of interest for today? I do not hear any. And we'll move on to our first public matter. Good afternoon, Premier Cochrane. And just before I get you to start your opening remarks, I'd like just to discuss how this meeting will proceed. All comments and questions or remarks will be directed to me, the chair. Both members and witnesses will need to wait to be recognized before speaking. This is just to allow some flow and to process to allow the committee clerk to turn on and off the people's microphones. And we have a speakers list that I've forwarded them to the members ahead of time. And with that, Madam Premier, the line is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Chair, I want to thank everyone for the opportunity to discuss our ongoing recovery planning and for the frank discussion that we had earlier. I look forward to continuing our collaboration as we move forward with our recovery planning. The Government of the Northwest Territories' initial response to the COVID-19 pandemic has been characterized as urgent and immediate action to ensure the safety of residents and ensuring systems were in place to support the Chief Public Health Officer's orders. This has very much been the mode that the DMWT has been in for the last several weeks, along with governments throughout Canada and across the world. We've experienced an unprecedented opening of our borders and mandatory orders restricting movement in businesses. Yesterday, we saw the announcement of the Chief Health Officer of further measures and clarification to continue the protection of our residents. As our efforts to contain the spread of COVID-19 continue to succeed, we can turn to the gradual and phased relaxation of those measures. Yesterday, we also saw the release of a First Minister's statement on shared public health approach to restarting our economy. I look forward to seeing these principles guide our work as we turn to our own planning for the safe relaxation of measures based on best available scientific evidence and the unique challenges and risks faced in the Northwest Territories. Now that the initial crisis is in some control, the DMWT has shifted our focus to the impact of COVID-19 economically and socially. The government recognizes that a comprehensive economic and social plan should not be developed without the input of MLAs, Indigenous governments, community governments, and other stakeholders. We need to all work together to respond to both the economic and the social impacts caused by this pandemic. Many of the economic challenges that we will face are already being raised. Our tourism industry has been completely shut down. Many of the businesses, from airlines to family-run storefronts, are struggling to survive. Many local businesses have been required to close, and virtually all others have seen business dramatically reduced. We all recognize that the economy will need support beyond our own capacity, and this means working with communities and business community partners, Indigenous governments, the federal government, as we consider ways to boost our territory's economy. We're also seeing social conditions that will require ongoing attention. We've seen our efforts to implement social distancing and isolation hindered by crowded housing, homelessness, and mental health, including addictions. We always knew we had challenges in these areas, but the challenges in the context of this pandemic have brought them to the forefront in terms of need to protect individuals and communities from the risk of COVID-19 spread. We've increased supports for low-income and homeless residents and implemented initiatives that are showing success, such as managed alcohol programming. We should not expect that we can simply return to the programs we had before, and we need to be planning for continued and strengthened programs, services, and supports ahead. We must also start planning for a more digital world. We have seen dramatic changes in the delivery of education in an incredibly short period of time, and realize the critical need for increased distance education capacity in all of our communities. Within only a matter of weeks, we've also seen rapid increases in the use of remote healthcare delivery, electronic filing, and virtual court appearances, and nearly all of our meetings have been conducted remotely. The way we conduct business of government and provide services has already changed, and we need to prepare for what people are calling the new normal. The planning for this needs to be inclusive, and the objective for seeing our territory emerge stronger and more capable than it was just a few weeks ago. Mr. Chair, we prepared a short presentation that provides an explanation of our thinking so far on the approach to moving our planning forward. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Mr. Cho, Madam Premier, and with that, you could proceed on with the presentation. Mr. Goldney, the line is yours.
Yeah.
Mr. Goldney, the line is yours. I believe your mic might be on mute.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, it's the Premier. Just let you know that Martin just had a little bit of technical difficulty, and we'll be on in the next minute or so.
Thank you, Madam Premier. Okay, we'll stand by. And just thanks for everybody's patience just while we're waiting until Mr. Golden gets back online. Appreciate it.
Mr. Chair, can you hear me? It's Caroline here.
Yeah, yes, Minister Wawzonek, the line is yours.
And I'm going to step aside to be distant and let Mr. Goldney perhaps use my computer.
Yes, go ahead. Line is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hopefully people can hear me now.
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
All right, so thank you. I will turn to the presentation, which is intended just to describe our thinking on developing our longer-term recovery plans. So just turning to slide 2, just a short description of, I think, what everybody recognizes is the significant economic and social impacts that we are facing as a result of this unprecedented health emergency, which really puts us in uncharted territories. But part of this presentation is intended to show that this isn't just an economic recovery plan that is needed. We need to turn to our longer-term planning that includes, as the Premier mentioned in her opening remarks, the delivery of our social programs and the social and economic well-being of the people of NWT, and have to consider how some of our early initiatives to respond to the pandemic are carried forward. And the way that we work as a government has changed, and this requires us to plan for the different expectations and the different realities that we are facing. So on slide 3, there is a bit of a chart there, and this is just intended as an illustration, and it's based on some emergency planning modeling. This is a Deloitte model this is based on, but many are similar. And what it describes are what are typically 3 phases of emergency or disaster recovery. The first characterized by the urgent response phase, where decisions have to be made quickly. Second phase focused more on recovery, where there's more opportunity to do some medium and longer term planning. And the third phase is some models call resiliency, but really it's about how do we respond to an emergency in a way that we can emerge stronger. And an example might be if a house falls down because of a hurricane, we shouldn't expect to build the house in the same way. We should be looking to make it stronger and more resilient. And in the same vein, as we look at the economic shockwaves and the social shockwaves that are resulting from this pandemic, we should be looking at how we make things better and emerge stronger. So on this chart, there's really 3 sectors described as well, and one is the health sector and some of the immediate responses that have to be taken, along with some of the medium-term recovery planning and some of the longer-term planning. Similar for the economy on the second row. And on the third row is really the business of government description, how some things have changed in the business of government and some of the longer-term planning that is required as a result. And I should just say that this is just meant for an illustration. This is meant to show some of the scope of the questions that need to be asked and the planning that needs to be done. It is by no means an exhaustive list of everything that has to be done. And some are marked as questions. Sometimes it's not just a question of whether, but in every case it's a question of how we plan to carry out that work. And that's what we need to be positioning ourselves to do moving forward. So the next slide, slide 4, lists again some of the measures that have been taken to date where we were in that first phase of responding quickly. And we've learned some lessons as these measures have been implemented and been undertaken. We've encountered some of the challenges that the Premier also spoke about, and recognized that as part of our longer term planning, we really do need to address some of those issues. So the next slide describes some of the things that we expect to be different as a result of the pandemic and the new normal that the people of NWT will be facing. And I know that this is a subject of conversations around the country, but it is just a list of some of the things that, again, we need to be planning for and acknowledge in that planning that we can't expect things to be the same as we emerge out of the pandemic. The next slide describes a bit of the role of government in economic recovery, and we do recognize that the GNWT is a significant, large and stabilizing part of the territorial economy. We do represent a much higher proportion of the territorial GDP as a public sector government than is found in other places. So that does give us some resiliency, but it's not going to be the full answer. We know that there are going to be some tools available to the GNWT to help the people and businesses of the NWT, but we can't do it alone. We're going to need partnership and support. On the next slide is just meant to be recognition that, as I stated earlier, this shouldn't just be a conversation about economic recovery. We need to also recognize that we should be preparing for social recovery and considering what we can do to improve the social well-being of the people in the Northwest Territories, along with the economic well-being. And we would very much like to do that in a way that is collaborative, that is research-based and data-driven, and developed in a way that benefits from the engagement of stakeholders, including NGOs, communities, Indigenous governments, and the federal government. So the next slide describes, how we'd like to set ourselves up for success in planning. And that, as I mentioned, does require ideally a unified approach. And there is an opportunity that we're seeing to focus on a common objective and goal. And that, frankly, isn't something that always exists. That hasn't really presented itself in the same way that this pandemic recovery discussion does. And the next bullet on that slide, again, it's not meant as a criticism, but just to acknowledge that we are in unique times where we are having extensive discussions with partners. Now we're having extensive engagements intergovernmentally, including jurisdictions across the country, with the federal government, with community governments and Aboriginal governments. And we should be taking advantage of the common will to move things forward in a better way and set ourselves up so that we can continue that collaborative effort moving forward. And in our view, that should include the business community, the social sector, communities and Indigenous governments as part of those conversations. So that's, in broad strokes, describes the broad economic and social recovery. I will also note on the next slide that there is also a conversation happening across the country about how we might see and what conditions might be required to see the relaxation of public health measures that have been put in place relaxed and the economy gradually reopened in a phased and safe approach. So that, yesterday there was an announcement of a shared statement among First Ministers that highlights some of the principles that should guide that discussion and some of the criteria that should be in place to inform some of those decisions about how things move forward from the public health perspective related to opening up the economy. The next slide provides a bit more information on what that First Minister's shared approach included, including some of the guiding principles. And the document itself lists some criteria that should be in place, including the ability to manage surge capacity, having adequate testing, and having the appropriate measures. And that has very much been the focus of a lot of the work that has happened over the preceding weeks, where the NWT is in, frankly, an enviable place where we have some capacity and we have those plans in place. We also have a different risk profile in other jurisdictions, so we do have to respect the work of the public health advisors, and I expect that we'll be hearing more from the Chief Public Health Officer as that part of the discussion moves forward. And in the meanwhile, we want to be focusing on a broader plan. So it's not just the economy, and it's not just a discussion on relaxing the public health measures, but how do we set ourselves up moving forward in the best possible way? What needs to be put in place to help facilitate a a collaborative approach to those discussions. So we do have, and it's not in the slides, but we have shared with MLAs a draft governance model that's still the subject of ongoing discussions, but perhaps I can ask Mr. Rutland to put that on the screen. And there it is. So what is on the screen is really just an illustration of the proposed governance framework, and we know that it's still a work in progress. Committee has heard previously about some of the work related to the Business Advisory Council. What we're proposing is a broader discussion that includes advisory councils, not just with the business community, which is important, but also the health and social sector being included in those conversations, along with the council representing Indigenous communities as well. So those perspectives are included and formalized in the structure so that as decisions are being made, we have the benefit of those perspectives as well. So the rest of that illustration includes something that's a bit more typical of our government decision-making process, which includes deputy minister committees supported by working groups that flow up to committees of cabinet where we provide options and receive direction and inform some of the discussions at the cabinet and FMB table. Another feature that has been added and suggested that it's important for this longer-term recovery discussion is the inclusion of a joint special committee that would include members of cabinet and MLAs as well. The model also includes recognition that these discussions should be guided with the benefit of a fiscal impact study team, or assessment team rather. So we know that this work is going to be important. The plan is to have it done as collaboratively as possible. We know we need to work on some terms of reference for those advisory groups, and we have some legwork to do with some of the representatives in those sectors so we can start fleshing those out in more detail. And we're looking forward to carrying that work forward in the coming days. So perhaps, Mr. Chair, I'll stop there.
Okay, Masicho, Mr. Goldney. With that, we'll turn the lines over to the members, and we have a list that we agreed upon earlier. So up first for Q&A, I have Emily Johnson. Emily Johnson, line is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate this presentation. I don't really have any issues with it. The response, recovery, resiliency principles put forward are fine. I understand the question marks are on a number of those things are because how do we do it, but there really shouldn't be question marks. Accelerate digital government, as an example. Clearly, we need to accelerate digital government. If we come out of this and every single GNWT service is not available in some sort of online failure, that's a failure to me. Or online format, that's a failure to me. We also have a question mark beside economic stimulus, which is very frustrating to me. I'm concerned that the lack of detail in this presentation and this push to start committees and engage stakeholders is really an excuse for us not to get money out the door to small businesses. We've seen that ITI's position is that money will be used for recovery, meaning not right now, and we're relying largely on the feds through CanNor, but I think that's a fundamental problem. If we're going to rely on entrepreneurs and an entrepreneurial spirit to build our recovery, we can't have businesses closing their doors right now. We need to be supporting them because it's a lot easier to retool an existing business than it is to open a brand new one. So I'm concerned that this presentation has $0 attached to it. We've seen phase 1 and we've seen phase 2, which made some, initial cuts, but I really want to see some economic stimulus spending. So my question to the Premier or to the Minister of Finance is when is the GNWT going to spend some money? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Emily Johnson, Madam Premier, or Minister Wawzonek, who would like to take that response?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do see Mr. Wawzonek has lit up the funding aspect. Thank you.
Okay, let's see, Madam Premier. Minister Wawzonek, the line is yours.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, Mr. Chair, I appreciate the comment, and there are some question marks put in here, and it's not for lack of wanting to spend money. It's for the realistic assessment that the bigger picture planning is one where we want to have those engagements, so that the longer term spending, the longer term plans, and the longer term vision that's going to be developed is one that is meant to be all of government, including all MLAs, all of the assembly, as well as stakeholders. As far as when is the government going to start spending money, there's been a lot of announcements already. There's been literally billions of dollars that have come out of the federal government, a lot of which has involved partnerships here with the GNWT. So that times, as you're aware, when the federal government is rolling out money, it requires us to be involved, to be supportive of what they're doing, whether it's because we're the actual entity that does the actual screening, the actual loaning, the analysis. So, I don't think that's going to end anytime soon. And as far as more specific money coming out of the GNWT, again, right now we're in an interim appropriation. So I think we want to be a little bit careful before we commit to too many things, in the sense that we need to make sure that we have our own fiscal house in order before we start making those commitments. And right now on an interim appropriation, without having gone back to the Assembly, I don't know that we would want to make millions or hundreds of millions of dollars of promises. But that is exactly why I think we're trying to put this plan before the MLAs right now, out to the public, get the feedback so that we can move quickly and come up with a plan where we can be spending some of our own dollars in a stimulus way. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Wawzonek. Madam Premier, would you like to add to that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Minister Wawzonek did a wonderful job at explaining where we are financially. I think the only thing I would say is that, yes, absolutely, a digital government shouldn't be a question mark. I think the question mark is more of what does it look like. They were not going there. We are absolutely going there. This has been evidenced in the last few weeks. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Premier. Up next, I have Emily Jacobson. Emily Jacobson, the line is yours.
Yeah, no, thank you, Mr. Chair. No, just in regards to the stimulus package on the rollout for the airlines for my riding, how is that? How is the uptake, I guess, Madam Premier or the Finance Minister in regards to working with Upclock Air and Canadian North to see if they're going to be bringing in, I guess, how is the funding role or access to funds to help them try to recover costs because of lack of trips up into the Beaufort Delta and into the Nunavut communities? Thank you.
Thank you, Emily Jacobson. Who would like to take that response, Minister Wawzonek or Madam Premier?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's the Premier here. If Minister Nokleby is on, we are engaging with the airlines. We do get money from the federal government. If Minister Nokleby is on, she might be able to perhaps share some. How is she engaging with the airlines, if that's appropriate, Mr. Chair?
Thank you, Madam Premier. Minister Nokleby, the line is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We recognize, as we've worked through the airline recovery piece, which was one of our first critical focuses as we dealt with COVID, we recognize that the first round of funding that has come is likely not going to be enough to bail out all of our airlines or to keep them all going. So we're definitely in a triaging type situation where the first round, and I believe this was under the federal direction, was towards sort of the larger carriers. We also are going to be looking at the phase one funding to stabilize our emergency response system. So ensuring that those airlines that are critical for for medevac, et cetera, are rescued. We acknowledge that there's definitely a lot more that's needed to save other airlines. We have engaged with regional carriers. We do anticipate the second round or second phase of funding from the federal government to be more addressing the smaller regional airlines. We recognize, and put a very loud voice at all of my FPT tables, regarding the need for airline carriers and how our small communities are stranded without them. So that includes your region, Mr. Jacobson. And definitely we are going to continue to be pushing the federal government hard for round 2 of funding, and then pressing upon them that it's not only our community supply, it's also our exploration industry, it's our tourism industry, it's the contaminated sites reclamation industry. All of those are dependent on those small charter carriers, and we recognize that, and we're working hard with the federal government to continue to push that forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Nokleby. Would you like to add to that, Madam Premier?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to add to it just that the airlines is a critical concern for all jurisdictions, and especially us in the north. Many of our supply chains are dependent on the airline industry. Nunavut is also in the same position, in fact, even in a worse situation with their supply chain and their dependence on airlines. So I just met with our northern premiers today as well, earlier today, and we've all committed, all 3 territories have committed to working together to work with the federal government to try to get support for our airline companies. And Mr. Chair, I'm not sure if Minister Wawzonek wanted to talk a little bit on the finances with the airlines, but if she would like to, she might want to take the chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Premier. Yes. So with that, Minister Wawzonek, would you like to add to that response?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think you've actually heard a lot. I won't spend a lot of time on it other than just to add that finance has also been working with respect to airlines and coming up with a plan that we can go back to both internally here, what we can do internally with the amounts that are spent on airlines or traditionally spent on airlines, but also going back to the federal government with very specific asks. So I'm expecting that that'll be ready by early next week, and then we'll be able to come back to the committee and to the public at that time. Thanks.
Thank you, Minister Wawzonek. Going back to our queue, I have up next Emily Simpson. Emily Simpson, the line is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess when I kind of reflect on what's going on here is that with respect to funding programs and that, the programs that are being rolled out by the federal government and the GNWT government are basically, I think, funds that are there to plug a hole, really. What we have to focus on, if we're looking at recovery, is what businesses actually need. And what businesses need is actual shovel-in-the-ground ready work. That's what they need. They need to be able to generate a profit if they're going to survive. Loans and deferrals won't do it. And when I look at that, where are we going to get our most bang for our buck? And it's going to be through the Department of Infrastructure and the Department of the Housing or the Housing Corporation. Those are the two that have a fairly big budget that will actually provide work for the communities and for contractors and provide employment. In the presentation, I guess I hear that we're going to try and prop up the economy. We're going to try and make sure it works out there. But what I don't hear is that we're going to do it for actually northern people and northern businesses. I want to make sure that the money that we're spending is going to be for our northern businesses, and we are going to employ northern people. And we do, and I keep saying this, we have tools out there to make this happen. And I know that in talking with departments, there always seems to be some reluctance. So I want to ask the Minister of ITI or the Minister of Infrastructure, how is she going to make sure that northern businesses and northern residents are the ones who reap the benefits from whatever we do? And what tools does she specifically have to make this happen? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, MLA Simpson. Minister Nokleby, the line is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This was actually something that was identified as one of our priorities or mandates early on in our assembly. So it continues to be a focus or a major focus of my department, made more critical now by the onset of COVID. So everything that MLA Cynthia is saying is exactly what the discussion is in our department. We recognize that not only do our dollars go and keep those businesses afloat, they have 2 and 3 times fold indirect benefits of keeping people off of income assistance. It also has mental health supports, etc., that come from people working and feeling productive and getting up in the morning. So all of this does remain a priority to me and my departments, as well as Cabinet and the Assembly as a whole. We are currently we will be reviewing BIP, as we had mentioned prior to COVID, so that's one area. We're looking at our scoring for RFPs, so that we can further enhance our Indigenous and Northern business content for those RFPs. It is a very complex situation, and I do recognize the members' frustration sometimes with what seems to be just go and do this. I was recently have been very thoroughly briefed on the complex issues around procurement, and there are some things around legalities with the funding that comes from the federal government and how we can then tender that out. So what we've done is we are going to be soon coming to Cabinet with a presentation on procurement and BIP, and then we will be taking that presentation and offering to deliver that to yourselves so that you can also have a better understanding of the complexity of the situation. And I definitely recognize the frustration around watching Southern work go to the South. I think I was very vocal about that in my own campaign. So it is definitely still a priority of mine. I can tell you that the Department of Infrastructure is very, very busy with our capital projects list, as well as our client projects, and ensuring that as many of those projects go forward. We do have a complexity now of having to add in additional health and safety requirements and assessments because COVID. So we also have to deal with small communities that perhaps are very fearful of Southerners coming in. How are we going to, Southerners being outside of their community, even people from within the territory? So we have to deal with all of that, and that's what the work that the department is doing. Another concern will be how do we consult properly with communities and Indigenous governments when we can't meet with them face to face. So that's another thing that we're discussing. I know there was concern around ensuring that these contracts stay in the north. We also have to look at whether or not, just even if the business is not northern owned, are they employing northerners? Are they actually maximizing more of their benefits for the people of the territory? So it's more complex than just who is the 51% owner, but I do recognize that this has been a longer ongoing discussion that we've been having for a while, and it continues to be at the forefront of my departments, both my departments. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Nokleby. Madam Premier, would you like to add to that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Absolutely. Northern priority. Sorry, are you getting the feedback that I'm getting? I apologize if you're getting any feedback. Northern business, northern employment is one of the priorities of the 19th Legislative Assembly. It's a priority of Cabinet as well. I did give direction actually within the last few weeks where I had a chance to get over the shock of the health and safety concerns. The first direction that came out of my mouth was, or one of the first ones, was find out what projects we have on the books now for capital. Our businesses are suffering. Find out which projects can actually be done by Northern Hire, and then as the Minister or the MLA had mentioned earlier, ones that need to be essential services or specializations, those ones need to be relooked at again. So it's all about Northern business and supporting Northern people. That's what we're here for. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Premier. Mr. Wawzonek, would you like to add to that? No? Okay. Okay, we'll move along. Going back to my queue, I have Emily Marcellos. Emily Marcellos, line is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I want to touch on a couple of items. One of them is the whole idea of small carriers. As you know now, Mr. Chair, there's no flight to Yellowknife with our small carrier with Northwestern Airlines, and it's because of this whole shutdown of everything. And you know, a lot of staff has been put on hold, and they had to be laid off for various reasons because of there's not enough passengers flying, and you know, we don't even have a flight going to Yellowknife anymore. And you know, I understand there. I don't know if has been any dialogue with the small carrier, but and even the flights to Edmonton are cut to three a week, I think, and that's it. It's very devastating. I cannot tell you. And if you did get one financial input or financial help from the federal government, and it went to the larger carriers, it only makes sense that you also look after the smaller carriers. The smaller carriers are more important in this pandemic than the larger carriers, because they're the ones that keep the small communities connected to the capital. So, you know, I'm happy to hear that Minister Wawzonek has something going into the federal government and is going to emphasize the importance of communication and transportation in the smaller communities. And I want to also reiterate some of the comments made by both Rocky and a few others about Northern Business and Northern Hire, and making sure that the BIP is updated. We've been asking this as soon as we were in the Assembly. It is now, we've been here for, 6 months already? And we're still talking about the same thing and getting the same answer. I think that, you know, there's a lot of people in these departments. They're not all working on pandemic. And there's a lot of people that could come together to make sure that we actually look at Northern content, and we actually look at updating that BIP program and follow it, and to ensure that negotiated contracts are in place for Northern people. There's nothing wrong with that when we're recovering. And that's the only way we're going to be able to keep the dollars in the North. And as a strong person in business, I feel that's the only way we have to. And I get frustrated. I've been frustrated for the last month, you know, about how we're going to recover. You know, there's a lot going on, and you know, I don't want to see any business fail. I don't care which part of the North it is, because business is what makes the world go round. And balanced business is important too, to make sure that we also make sure that the balance of both the whole thing with climate change and the environment and our business aspects are all taken into on the same level, because our Indigenous communities would want that. So with that, Mr. Chair, those are my comments. And I want to really thank the Premier and for taking the time with us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily Marcellos. Comments, Madam Premier?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Absolutely. Our small carriers are one of our biggest concerns in the Northwest Territories. Those are critical for our supply chain, making sure we get groceries and building supplies getting into communities. It's not only a concern of ours, it's a concern of Nunavut. We've agreed to work with them and actually looking at that. So we will be going back to the federal government, as stated by Minister Wawzonek, and looking to advocate for more money for our airlines, and as Minister Nokleby stated, that we're working with the airlines together. As for Northern businesses, Northern contracts, I don't think I've heard anyone in this Legislative Assembly that has gone against that. I think we're all in agreement that we want Northern contracts, Northern jobs for Northern people. That's only logical, especially in a time when our economy is so for a week. But if you look at the model that we presented, it talks about the advisory committees. I have a feeling none of those, the Business Advisory Committee, the Indigenous Government Committee, even the Health and Social Sector Advisory Committee will say, send our jobs south. I certainly know, correct me if I'm wrong, that the Joint MMA Cabinet Committee would never want that to happen. So we have so many checks and balances in force, Mr. Chair, that I believe that we will see northern jobs for northern businesses and northern residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Premier. Minister Nokleby, would you like to add to that response? Okay, hearing none.
Sorry about that. Just to reiterate that, yes, we have been having lots of discussions with the various airlines. I can't speak to specific companies. However, we have a huge reduction in traffic and air traffic for people that want to take airlines. So we have reductions in flights all across the territory. I know that early on I spoke with Air Canada. I think about the first day we closed the border, and they indicated they had gone from flying at 110 airports around the world to 5. So this is a global issue, not just specific to the Northwest Territories, and we are very, very committed and concerned about our small regional carriers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nokleby. Going back to McHugh, up next I have MLA O'Reilly. The line is yours.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I want to thank the Premier for the presentation today and the diagram as well. It's clear that her and her team have been doing a lot of thinking about this, as we all have. I have some comments about the process part of the, I guess, the last slide, as well as some comments on the substance, I think, of economic recovery. So on the diagram at the end, I want to make sure that the NGO component includes not just the social NGOs, but there are other NGOs that I think can and should be part of that process and can make contributions. And I'm thinking of the environmental organizations, or there's other NGOs that I think should be included there. I want to make sure that organized labor is included in this process as well, as looking at economic recovery. And I think it's going to be very important to think about the linkages and relationships of all of these bodies to each other, and make sure that it all works together in a clear and coherent fashion. On the Business Advisory Council, I'm disappointed at how long it's taken to get this set up. The Yukon government had their Business Advisory Council set up on March the 25th, over a month ago, very representative across a whole number of sectors, giving them advice on the design of their stimulus and recovery packages. We still don't have that in place, and I'm disappointed at how long this has taken. In terms of the substance of the work that I think needs to be done, sorry, I just want to go back to the Joint Committee for a second. I do think that I do support that. I think it's a good idea. I do want to make sure, though, that part of the work is going to be done in public, and that there's going to be a reporting component that's not just giving advice to the Premier and Cabinet, that there's a public reporting component to that as well, and access to outside expertise. In terms of the subject matters and focus of economic recovery, I want to support some of the comments made by some of my colleagues. I think we have to recognize there's some things that we can control, and there's a lot of things that we can't control. We cannot control commodity prices. We cannot control financing to a great extent. So I want to make sure that our government is not going to spend too much time and emphasis on trying to help the diamond mines recover. We don't have deep enough pockets, and we can't control commodity prices. A lot of the work that I've seen coming out of ITI is very much on that focus, and I think we have to shift the focus to small business, where we can actually have some influence, particularly when it comes to government spending. And I'm not going to go over the points made about procurement, but that is something we can influence and need to have a greater control over. I do think that connectivity needs to be a big part of the focus of the recovery work. We've seen that there's unequal access to internet and so on across the territories. We've got to fix that. That was a promise made during the Mackenzie Valley Fiber Link that is still unfulfilled. We've got to look at building food security, and that's an urgent matter in my view. And the remediation work that can and needs to be done. The federal government is already putting extra money into remediating oil and gas sites, and we should be trying to access some of that and make sure that it can also be used to deal with other contaminated sites across the Northwest Territories. So lastly, I guess I'm also disappointed by some comments that the Minister of Finance made before the Federal Finance Committee, whereby a lot of the emphasis was put on the big infrastructure projects. These are not shovel ready. They have to go through extensive environmental assessments. They're years away. There's no business case for these things. There's no funding. That's not the kind of emphasis I want to see that our government puts forward to the federal government. The remarks made by the Minister of Finance look a lot like what the previous finance minister would have made in the last cabinet, and I thought we had moved beyond that. What we need too is a new fiscal relationship with the federal government where we get to keep more of our own source revenues. That's why I guess I would look to our Minister of Finance to push with the federal government. But so there's some ideas about how to make this, I think, a better process, but also some substantive ideas in terms of, I think, what some of the focus of the economic recovery should be. But I want to thank the Premier and her team for appearing before us. Opportunity to begin these conversations. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, MLA O'Reilly. Madam Premier, line is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Absolutely. The NGL component, yes, the whole purpose of this model is to be as inclusive as possible. Still, at the same time, recognizing that we've got a lot of work to do in a short time. This model will go on for a long period of time because our world is changing. However, we need to get in and get our ass and address these businesses that are struggling now. The organized labor unions, absolutely. Again, that's why we brought it to committee so that we could get these input into it. I think it's very important that they actually are part of it. They are a major portion of the economy and the workers. The Business Advisory Council, I'm sorry to hear that the MLA is a bit disappointed and that the Yukon Heather is going. I do know that we're all trying our best, and sometimes it's not a matter of the first one to the trough. It's a matter of making sure that everyone is at the trough and everyone is doing the right thing. So more than all territories have shared our models from different areas. I'm going to put some of our models on the border closing. We'll probably use some of Yukon's models. We've already been talking about these things. So, and I want to express to the public, I know that everybody would like an answer today. COVID-19 hit us about 6 weeks ago. We spent the first part of it, at least 2-3 weeks before, focusing just on the health and safety of our residents, locking down our borders, getting our public health orders in place, getting all the infrastructure, all the people power, all of the things, the systems that we needed to get to abide by those orders. And then we focused on our PPEs, making sure we had enough right throughout the territory, connecting with all of the different sectors of that. So now we're on the economy. We haven't forgot it. As the Minister of Finance said, we rolled out a couple of initiatives. We're looking at supporting our people, but the work is just beginning. On the reporting, absolutely, this government made a commitment when we were all elected. I made the commitment when I was elected as Premier to be as transparent as possible. So having the public having part of the work being in public, I don't see an issue with that at all. Recognizing some will have to be behind closed doors, and proper reporting components for the public, not a problem. all the ideas, Mr. Chair, on internet, food security, finance, remediation work, those are great ideas. Those are the ideas that we're looking for once we have these committees and they start the work. But we're taking note of them. On that, Mr. Chair, I'm not sure if the Minister of Finance did want to speak to it, but thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Premier. Minister Wawzonek, would you like to speak to this?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I know there was a comment there towards the end with respect to comments into the messaging that I had delivered last week on the invitation of the Federal Finance Committee. And a couple of comments I just wanted to make quickly. Firstly, the concern that there's an emphasis on big infrastructure projects, and right now I think our emphasis is on small projects, and wanting to make sure that we are both responsive to what the federal government are asking for, which is what is shovel ready, what projects do you have shovel ready, but also wanting to make sure that we're speaking from a position of vision, that we're not just looking at, what projects do we have in our capital plan for the next year, of which we have over $400 million in the capital plan already approved, and I think we want to try and spend that as much as possible, right, wherever we can, keeping in mind with Chief Public Health orders and what's in place. We want to be looking to what we can do across Northwest Territories. That's and that's being, I think, realistic in terms of wanting to make sure we get our share of federal dollars going forward with those projects. But the three recommendations I actually made to the committee, firstly for flexibility, both in terms of our borrowing flexibility, but also in terms of investment flexibility. We need to do something other than just the 75-25. We need to look at better ways of engaging, whether that's equity partnerships from Indigenous governments, and different kinds of arrangements with the federal government. So that flexibility was number one, and that was all kinds of projects and all kinds of investments. The second one was on broadband, telecommunications and connectivity. Those promises were made by the federal government, and they need to go through on them. I couldn't agree more that we need to follow through on those promises. And the third one is that we start looking at the Arctic and Northern Policy Framework. That Arctic and Northern Policy Framework spoke to so many things that have come into stuff with COVID-19. Everything from the fact that we have struggles in our healthcare system, struggles in our education system, struggles with broadband and connectivity, as well as needing all kinds of infrastructure. We have an infrastructure deficit. We see it in telecommunications, but we also see it in transport. We see it in our dependence on the airline. So, when I'm speaking to the Federal Finance Committee, it's to show them COVID-19 has made more obvious than ever that we have to have a long-term vision. We have to have a long-term vision that involves our economy and our society. I think this sort of really what the premise of the committee right now is one way forward of doing that. And just on that note, I'll finish by saying that, in fact, the response to things Emily Marcello's, that we're going to recover. We're going to recover because we have to recover, and we're going to do it by looking at both the big infrastructure projects as well as all the different pieces of society and economy that we need to bring together. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister Wawzonek. Just to remind everybody online, just to make sure that you have your mics muted. We heard some noises there in the background. Okay, going back to McHugh. Up next, I have Emily Green. Line is yours. Miss Green, are you online? Okay, I just got a message from her. Moving along, I'll go to Emily Clune.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. To start off, I'd like to just touch on and ask why it was law in regards to the committee. I'd like to start off, I think, just by requesting that any committees we put together are actually a representative of the community. So if we're looking at the business community, making sure that that community is properly represented by actual business owners who are on the ground and understand the challenges faced by businesses from one border to the other. My next request would be, because everything is connected, that we really understand how these committees work together, how they fit into one another, and how action comes out of them. Sorry, I've got really bad feedback. Okay?
Well, Emily Cleveland, it's the chair here. Just make sure that your speakers are muted, or any other devices that might be on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My third request is just in terms of reporting. How does the information get from committee back to cabinet to make sure that what is being set up committee is properly heard and being able to properly action? And my last is because these are things that we need people who are working in our community to put our communities back together, that we're using your time wisely, very efficiently and effectively to make sure we take the information and are able to action it quickly. My last would be that really now would be the time for recovery. I appreciate what Emily O'Reilly said in terms of our community insecurities, with our digital infrastructure and our food insecurities. And I completely agree that these are items that we need to be able to look at and action right away. In terms of our digital infrastructure, this has been broad reach across our outlook, education for kids right now is all being done online, virtual healthcare, safety for people that may be in situations where they need to be able to reach out to others, and also social development. And I feel like in the month right now, there's a huge inequity that it really needs to be addressed, and we really need to make sure that we're working on our kind of our digital highway process as well. I'd like to also just add in there that in terms of employee northern, I appreciate Cabinet's commitment to northern hiring and keeping the dollars in the north. But what we've seen so far is that the stats don't necessarily reflect it. And I appreciate where Cabinet's coming from, but I really want to make sure that at the end of this, we can look back at the dollars spent and where they were spent and really be able to celebrate our investment in the north. And so I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Emily Cleveland. Okay, so with that, Madam Premier, would you like to take that response?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did have some technical difficulties here, and maybe echoing as well, but I will address the ones that I heard. Are you hearing me all right, though?
Yes, we are. We're starting to get a little bit of feedback through all the lines here. I'm not sure what is going on, but again, I'm asking everybody to make sure that your speakers and your mics are muted when you're speaking, or like when you're not speaking. Okay, go ahead. Line is yours, Madam Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So absolutely, I've heard the comments. Normally, stating that the district community needs to be properly represented. We have said that we're willing to work with the committee on that. Minister will be providing draft terms of reference very soon to committee, and just hoping to feedback on that. Learning how the committees all work together and how they feed information back and forth. So those are things that we can work on. Some of them we'll find. For example, the Indigenous Governments Advisory Committee. Many Indigenous governments have business owners. They might sit on the business advisory committee. Many of them are involved in the social service sector or the environment sector. So there will be some overlap in that, but also what we can do is share reports between committees, because the more informed we are as a whole, the better work we're going to get. How does the information feed back to cabinet? So we already talked about, the Indigenous governments. If you look on the model, it's kind of like a blue red model. You see the advisory committees as our experts. Being open to experts from outside as well. I hope that. DMs and staff will work on the information and bring it back to committees of cabinet. That information will all be given, their recommendations, plus the reports from the direct advisory committees will be given to the joint MLA and cabinet, and then work from there. Absolutely, food security is an issue. I brought that up with all three territories. So that's huge on our radar. We also want some food supply nationally, because that's an issue. And then moving into a digital world. I think I've said that over and over. That's not an option. We're here. And investing in the North. I every way has said invest in the North. I take it very seriously. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Premier. Up next, I have Emily Green. The line is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, one of the things that this pandemic has done is really highlighted the inequality of different segments of our society, not just socially, but economically as well. I am concerned, and other people have raised this, that the status of small business does not seem to be adequately considered in line with mining, although we have a lot more ability to assist small business than we've demonstrated up to this point. They are, in fact, I think the biggest segment of our economy in terms of employment. So they need not just help from the government, but they need to be the people who are on the front lines of business, need to be the business council. The council, as it's configured now, is heavy with government representation, and members have no say over the terms of reference. So there are some issues in setting that up and making it work properly. I find the Social Advisory Council not very comprehensive, and I realize this is a preliminary document, but there's nothing in it, for example, about how we are going to help our health system be prepared for the second wave anticipated of the pandemic. There's nothing in there about education and the fact that most children will have been out of the classroom for more than 6 months by the time they return. There's also almost nothing in there. There is nothing in there on justice or housing. And yet these are issues that have all been highlighted by the pandemic as issues that need further attention from us. And so I think that as a first draft, this will stand up, but there is a lot to do to fill in the gaps and make sure that the membership of these committees is as close to the service delivery as possible, and that there is an efficient way for those committees to forward their information to all of the MLAs, and also I think somebody else said to produce a report to meet in public, so that there's lots of information about what's happening available to the public. So those are my comments on this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily Green. Madam Premier?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Emily Green. Absolutely. It's one of the sad things about this pandemic is it has brought the inequalities between the social stratifications in society, and it is the point that when times get hard. So that is one of the reasons, like we said, that we are doing not only an economic, but an social recovery plan moving forward. The status of the small businesses have been not in line with the support community. I would have to say that actually small businesses has been at the forefront for the federal government especially. They've given monies for neighbors, employment, rental spaces, variety of areas. In fact, Magnus speaking very much so, because a lot of them is just going through renters. It's not addressing some of the needs in the north, like on small family businesses who might not have to pay rent, but still have to keep their lights on. So, we have been bringing things as well. That's part of what the council will do. I heard and I agree that all of the advisory committees need to be as close as possible to the people providing the services, the people impacted by it. I've heard that clearly. The Social Advisory Council, absolutely, they didn't put a lot into this presentation on it. Again, I wanted to get some feedback from Kelly because a lot of jurisdictions are only focusing on the economy. So it was
Can you step pause for a second, Madam President? We're having some really bad audio issues here. So with that, I probably think that we could probably pick this up another time.
very bad.
Okay, with that, we're going to just adjourn this public portion of the meeting. I want to thank Madam Premier, Minister Nokleby, and your support staff for putting it together. And we'll speak again soon. Masicho, and you're welcome. And with that,
Thank you for having us.
I'm going to my message board, and it looks like, is that?
Yeah.
It's awful.
It's off.
Yeah. Ooh.